Welcome to the Supplier Diversity and Inclusion Podcast by Fips Consulting. In this podcast, I speak with international guests who share their experience on supplier diversity and inclusion. Today, I speak to Ken Janssens, co-founder of Windō. Ken brings over 25 years as a tech and data executive, primarily at JP Chase. His career has spanned global financial hubs, including Tokyo, Sao Paulo, New York, and London. In 2023, he co-founded Windō, a trailblazing startup dedicated to connecting young talent with employers that share their values. Windō tracks the environmental, DEI, and well-being for over 600 of the largest global companies. Ken lives in London with his husband Thierry and their beloved dog. Ken, it's great to have you as my guest today. Thanks so much for being here.
An absolute pleasure to be here.
So, Ken, what I'm most excited about to hear is almost 25 years, at JP Chase and corporate. So when and why did you decide to start Windō?
It's a really good question. I think like many people coming out of COVID, I started to reflect on life and what was important to me. And up until then, I had a really amazing career at JP Morgan, nothing really to complain about. But I did start to notice that the pressure and the stress was starting to take an increasing toll on me. And so my husband and I decided to both quit our jobs. We went traveling in a motorhome for 12 months, traveling around Europe to try and figure out what we wanted to do next. It took a few months to really try and figure that out. I knew it needed to have three ingredients. It needed to include data, it needed to include DEI and sustainability, and it needed to include young talent. Three things that I've always been very passionate about. So fast forward a little bit, and that is what Windō is all about those three things. It's very data-driven. It helps young talent figure out which company is right for them. This is a generation that is much more purpose-driven and really like to do their homework on employers. So that's the platform we set out to build. And as you mentioned, we now track nearly 700 of the largest global companies.
So what should companies and individuals know about Windō? I mean, you mentioned it touches DEI, sustainability, young talents, but what is it really? What kind of platform is it really?
Yeah, what we've tried to do from day one is strike this balance between the quantitative and the qualitative. If you look at the average sustainability report, which can run into hundreds of pages, you will find a lot of qualitative, but not a lot of quantitative. There's this real mismatch. And both are important, don't get me wrong. You need to understand which programs companies have, what their strategies are. But just as important, and probably in equal measure, is then, okay, what is the data to back that up? What is the sort of numerical progress that you're making? And that is what we've really tried to do. So if you have a sustainability report that could be 200-300 pages, the equivalent of that for a company profile on Windō is maybe 2 A4 pages. And we summarize and we get that balance between the quantitative and qualitative. So really allowing people in 5 or 10 minutes to really understand, okay, what does is this company really serious about its commitment to the environment? What about DEI? What about well-being?
Right. So you're really putting information into kind of data and numbers as a summary from the many reports.
Yes. Yeah. And we do it in a Gen Z friendly way. We know how they like to consume data, which is bit-sized, not paragraphs. The design is very sort of Gen Z friendly, but it's also mobile friendly. So you can look at the data on your mobile, where we know most young people consume their content.
Right. So it's a platform for young talents to find out about potential future employers and how they engage in sustainability and DEI based on their public information, the CSR reports and everything that's out there that you summarize and then put it in bits and pieces, Gen Z friendly, so they can really have an overview of the companies out there and their engagement in these areas.
Yeah, and last summer we took that one step further. We now also, once they figured out who they want to work for, we also show them the early career opportunities those companies have. We want to be that one-stop shop that they can go, okay, this company looks right for me. Okay, do they have any opportunities for me?
And so the companies that you actually have on your website, all of the CSR information, are they working with you directly, or is this data that you just gather out of the web and provide it for free to the young talents that are interested in this information?
A little bit of both. So we initially set out to populate the profiles based on publicly available information, but now we do have partners. HSBC is one, Bloomberg is another one. And with those companies, we work very closely to not just like take their data from their CSR report, but also they might have some extra information that's not in their report, but that they think is very relevant for young talent. So, and then we supplement their profiles with that. So there are a few companies that we partner with very closely to really get that positioning right.
So that's pretty cool. And I think it's probably something that is very much asked for by Janssens, especially on these topics with sustainability, DEI, which is on top of everybody's mind in Janssens right now. So how can a company, you say you work with, for example, HSBC, which is one of your partners. How can companies engage with you, but also individuals? So if I'm somebody who is looking for a job, I'm going to your portal and want to like scrub the data and see which company might be a best fit for me. How can I do that?
Yeah, so the platform is completely free and open for anyone to use. And by the way, we have not just young people, young talent that use the platform. There's a lot of DEI professionals that use our platform because they can look at their competitors, and they also are interested in how we are summarizing effectively their reports, and we often get very positive feedback on that. Because I think the interesting thing about CSR reports is they typically have investors as the target audience. So it has to be very dense information with a very particular purpose. But I know there are some companies that wish they could communicate their CSR in the way that we present it, which is a little easier to consume. And then in terms of how companies can interact with us, so once they become a partner, we can do lots of things for them. We can target specific diverse demographics that they may want to attract to their early career opportunities. We're connected across 40 UK universities with more than 300 university societies. So we have a big network we can tap into to get those companies in front of. But we also do events. We do our big annual flagship event is at Bloomberg's headquarters in London, and we bring student leaders together from across the country.
So you actually also help corporates to find talent. Corporates that partner with you, do you help them to find talent if they have like an opening and they actively engage with you to find then the right people?
Yeah, and what also happens is we often get invited by universities. Universities may have a sustainability week with lots of events, and we sometimes get asked, oh, can you bring any speakers? And then, of course, the first people we speak to are our partners, Bloomberg, HSBC, and say, do you want to send a senior speaker? And they're obviously always very thankful that we provide these opportunities.
Well, so you're really at the core of finding talents with collaboration with universities and so on. And you mentioned your flagship event at Bloomberg. So can you share some more information about that so people can maybe come and take a look at themselves?
Yeah, sure. It's a full day event. We have between 130 and 150 university society leaders that come to that. It's a very diverse group. And yeah, they basically descend from all across the country, more than 40 universities. And what we do in that day is we have keynotes and panel discussions where we talk about what young people think about the environment, what they think about DEI. But we equally have some experts on environmental sustainability that come and talk. So it's a really fully packed day where they get to network a lot as well, and they get to meet some of the Bloomberg recruiters. So yeah, it's a full-on day.
Well, And did it just happen, or is there a new one planned this year?
There will be a new one. We typically hold it end of October, early November.
Okay.
So yeah, the next one will be later this year.
Stay tuned. Right. So you mentioned your platform is absolutely free, especially for talents. So if I'm looking for information on companies, their DEI, sustainability, CSR engagements, how is it for your corporate partners? I assume that they have to pay something, that they're actually get access to all the data, but also access to the talents.
Yeah, so they can use the platform just like young talent for free. However, we do have a number of products which are just for, so one of the things that we can do is we can run a very in-depth benchmarking report, and they can say, okay, I want to be compared to these 10 competitors, and we produce a very in-depth report, which is not so easy to do on the platform. Another product which we're actually launching in 2 weeks' time is what's called a diversity reporting barometer. And so it will be a free version of that will give you a sense of, at the macro level, whether companies are stepping up their commitments on DEI or pulling back. But the paid version will have much more in-depth views, including being able to filter by industry, by stock index, by location, so you can really see what's going on depending where you want to live.
Interesting. Your platform is mainly UK or Europe, right?
No, we cover the Fortune 100, and we're progressively working our way up to cover the full Fortune 500. So that's our goal for this year. So we track companies now in 11 countries, including Canada, pretty much all of the EU. So if it's a big company name that you've heard of, we probably already cover it. Across Europe and North America.
Cool. So I can imagine that with the recent developments in the US and the executive orders, did that have any impact on how you do business, on your business, on corporates that you work with?
Yeah, we're looking at this as an opportunity. And that's the diversity reporting barometer that I just mentioned is our answer to what is going on in terms of the attack on DEI. And it's really born out of a frustration that the media only tends to focus on companies that are pulling back. So we asked ourselves, what if we could produce a tool that pretty much near to real time could tell you exactly which companies are pulling back, but which companies are stepping up? And so far, 130 companies have published a 2024 report since the start of the year. And what we're seeing is more companies are adding DEI targets than companies that are removing it. So we're seeing the opposite. And it's still, you could argue it's still early days. 130 companies is, it's not necessarily the largest data set, but it's starting to become a number where we can see some early trends. A lot of companies are publishing their report over the next couple of weeks. So we expect we'll be at 200, 250 by the end of April. So the picture will start to become clearer and clearer. But maybe it shouldn't surprise people that the media doesn't write about companies that are creating new DEI targets or increasing their DEI targets. What gets headlines and what gets clicks is when companies pull back. So we want to be fact-based, look at the data at scale, and the tool is really aimed at DEI leaders who we know that they're going through an incredibly difficult time so that they can use the tool and say, okay, what is going on in my industry? Let me look what my competitors are doing so that we as a company can make sense how we should respond. And so far, we're still seeing 80% of companies set representation targets. That's only down from 84% year on year so far. So we're seeing some impact, but it's not like the sky is falling.
It's very good to see that there are organizations like Windõ who kind of close the gap there and help companies to navigate through these times and provide these reports and provide these comparisons and information of companies who are still active in DEI, sustainability, and what they do in their company.
Yeah, like one interesting industry where we're seeing them really stepping up on DEI is manufacturing. So it's one industry where we're actually seeing many more companies in that industry publishing DEI targets for the very first time. So there are definitely bright spots.
Yeah, I think also there might be a little bit of a shift from corporates who might step a little bit back, but others which are now stepping up. And as you mentioned, the number from 84 to 80%, it's really not a big gap. And as you said, there aren't so many companies who are stepping back, but there is still a lot of companies who are implementing DEI measurements in their companies.
Yes. And I think one thing that I think is really important for companies to understand is that young talent is watching. They are watching what companies are doing right now, and there will be a moment of reckoning. And young people will vote with their feet. And we know, because we did a very large survey at the end of last year, and we know that for more than 50% of UK young talent, DEI is a deciding factor. Commitment to DEI is a deciding factor whether they will even apply to the company. And every company needs young talent to be coming in, or they won't be around in 5 to 10 years. And by the end of this decade, Gen Z will make up 30% of the global workforce. So you can do the math yourself. If you disenfranchise that much of the workforce, what will happen to your company? And don't get me wrong, I have a lot of sympathy for companies. It cannot be easy if you have huge US government contracts that are on the line. They are receiving, unprecedented kind of pressure. But and I'm sure they're doing it, they need to also realize that will lead to consequences. And I also think there's a very good chance that employee turnover will increase and employee engagement scores will start to dip. And when you have a less engaged workforce, your productivity reduces. So, and these are things that hit the bottom line.
Totally. I mean, there were reasons, right, why companies implemented diversity, equality, and inclusion measurements in their workforce. It wasn't just because there's social, there is also a huge business case behind. It's more productivity, more innovation, so on and so on. And as you mentioned, I mean, Janssens is looking at companies, or at least 50%, right, in the UK who are active in these areas. Society is also diverse. We have about 15% of people with disabilities, 50+% are women. There are about 10% of people from an ethnic minority background in Europe. There is about 10% of people from the LGBTIQ plus community. So you're really missing out on a lot of clients, but also talents in your workforce if you're not putting some emphasis on diversity, equality, and inclusion.
Yeah, and I mean, DEI has somewhat become a toxic word, but I think ultimately which company does not want its workforce to look like the customers and the communities that they serve? I mean, which company does not want that? Because they know that will make them better able to serve those customers and those communities because they represent them. So that's what I think ultimately DEI, that's the goal. And that those people feel like that they belong there, then you have a powerful company that is well set for the future.
Yeah, that's also where, I am very passionate about the supply chain. I mean, the workforce, the customer base, but also the supply chain should represent the full diversity of society. So it's not just the workforce, it's not just the clients, but it's also the supply chain where you need to make sure that you work with diverse-owned businesses. So maybe businesses led by women, LGBTIQ individuals, people with disabilities, minority-owned businesses, veteran-owned businesses, but also social enterprises. And what's really important right now as well is small businesses, which has always been part of the whole supplier diversity and inclusion efforts. So I think it's really a holistic view of a company to look at DEI.
Yeah, I think And I'm glad you raised supply diversity, because it's really talking about the upstream and the downstream, right? So upstream is like you're facing off to customers, you're facing off to the communities that you operate in. But companies have a huge role to play. They have huge purchasing power themselves. Most companies need suppliers. And so having a DEI lens there is there. They have an amazing opportunity to do good in society as a whole by saying, let's just make sure that, we kind of use that power for good and make sure that we have a diverse supply chain.
Well, totally on the same page with you there. I mean, my passion is in the supply chain and sustainable, responsible supply chains, and including all kinds of suppliers, not always working with the same ones, not always working with the big ones, and really making sure you're opening doors for suppliers when you have opportunities. Now, we've been talking about talents, looking at companies that have opportunities, job openings. So is there any like a success story or something that you can share where you brought together talent with the company?
Yeah, I have a few, but I'll just... there was one student, and as a result of attending our flagship event at Bloomberg, she actually applied to Bloomberg. And during the application process, she wrote to me and she said, I don't know if I will get the job, but thanks to you, I'd looked at Bloomberg and I would never have basically considered them as a very viable. And she was so wanting to get the job. And I'm very happy to say that she's now part of Bloomberg and very happy there. So we have a few of those stories where that has happened. And that's why we do it. But it's really nice to see it play out in that way.
Cool. Yeah. Congratulations on that. And I believe many people probably don't know how much companies actually do in regards to DEI, sustainability, CSR, before they look at your portal or the summaries.
Yeah, and maybe stating the obvious, but not all companies are equal. A lot of companies have great brand names. So if you say JP Morgan or Goldman Sachs, like who doesn't know about that? And we all come with these preconceived ideas of what we think that company is about. But when you actually look a little bit deeper, these companies actually are very different. They're not just all the same. And depending on what it is that you're looking for, that could completely sway you and go, no, that's definitely the company for me. I mean, Bloomberg is a great example. You could think of them as a market data provider or maybe as a media company, because we've all seen Bloomberg TV at some point. But Michael Bloomberg, is one of the biggest philanthropic givers in the world. And that may not be known to everyone. And that's something that when they release their impact report, they really talk about at length. And then you see, wow, they're really trying to make the world a better place, including their amazing London office, which is one of the most sustainable offices in the world with an incredibly high certification. So, and that will appeal to certain people, that is the company for me, versus maybe another company that is operating in a similar space, but just doesn't have those same credentials.
I love it because it helps to bring this forward to get more companies to actually look at that. Because if I'm a competitor of Bloomberg, I would be like, what can we do to be on that level? And that might happen for other companies where you publish reports where others are looking at their competitor information and then also have to create some programs or step up in their actions.
Yeah.
Cool. I want to ask you about supply chain DEI as well. Is there anything on your platform that goes into that direction, or is that something that you plan to look at in the future?
We do track supplier diversity, but you're much more of an expert than I am. Sadly, not many companies share a lot of detail on that. So if they share their overall diverse supplier spend, that is mentioned on their DEI profile. And we also, for the few companies that share the breakdown of how much is with women-owned business, ethnic minority-owned businesses, etc., we provide that breakdown. And we do that both in dollar amounts and in percentages. depending on what the company provides. So there are a number of companies who provide it in their report, and it is something we have on the DEI.
So if the data is available publicly, it will also be in your summaries. Now, Ken, I have learned so much, and I think it's so important that you have such a platform, because I always thought about, when you want to work for a company, you always have to scrub their webpage and look for information and so on. And if it's very important to a person to work for a company who is strong in DEI, sustainability, CSR overall, it's such a great tool to actually then look for a potential new employer. And I think Windõ is really closing the gap there. And congratulations on building this platform. Ken, it has been so interesting talking to you, but we're almost at the end, and I want to ask you for one last thought takeaway that you want to leave us with.
Sure. Well, you may have heard of the saying, what gets measured gets done. And it's definitely something I believe in. 25 years at JP Morgan. As a former chief data officer, I definitely believe in things being measured. But I actually would like to take that one step further. And that is, what gets reported gets done. Because when companies put something out in the public domain, they're effectively putting it out there and holding themselves accountable. Even if that is not a great number to start with, they can recognize that and say that they're working on that. If they then don't improve that number, then that may come back to haunt them. So I firmly believe that when companies are very transparent and put things out into the public domain, it kind of creates this rallying effect for the entire organization to go, we've got to make this number better. And we can definitely see that by companies that are doing that. I would love to see more companies be vulnerable. And it's not something that they're great at. Nobody, and particularly young talent, is expecting a company to be perfect. They know the company's not perfect. But what they want to see is they want to see a commitment for it to be better. They're not looking for perfect. They're looking for a company that is prepared to sort of chip away at the problem and make it better. And I would love to see more companies be vulnerable. Just like we as human beings get encouraged to be vulnerable, organizations should do the same.
Maybe you're not the best at it, but at least you're honest and you're trying.
Exactly. And people see through that. People don't want glossy brochures. They want to see the raw, and they're we've got to do better.
Perfect. I love the words at the end. So Ken, thanks so much for being my guest. And I'll put the link to your platform, to Windõ, on the podcast information. And so much looking forward to hearing more and staying in touch.
Well, it's been really great being with you, Andrea. Really enjoyed our conversation. And I look forward to staying connected.
Thank you, Ken. Now, if you want to make your supply chain more inclusive, reach out via fipsconsulting.com or Fips Consulting on LinkedIn. Listen in to my next episodes where I talk to more experts about supplier diversity and inclusion and the impact it has on their company. Reach out if you have any inputs or topics around supplier diversity, inclusive sourcing, DEI overall that you want me to talk about. Thanks much for listening, and bye responsible.